Hi friends. For those who don't know me, my name is Jennifer Massey, and part of my story, and I say part because it is only part of the story, is that I lost my husband to suicide 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years, April the 11th. And like grief is for everyone, is different, and it comes in waves, and sometimes at very unexpected times, and sometimes at predictable times. So right now, when we're quarantining and staying inside and being a widowed empty nester has been particularly challenging. So last night I was really sad. I woke up in the middle of the night really sad, and I did something I hadn't done since the early days of when John died. I went to my closet and got out the blue velvet encased box of ashes and brought it to bed with me and just clutched it to my chest and cried with everything in me. And I cried until I didn't have any more tears left. And then I was still awake, so I went on Facebook, and one of the first things I do is check my Facebook memories every day. So I went and checked my Facebook memories, and I saw this story that I had written a year ago. I do a little writing from time to time, and this is this very different style for me because it was a vision that God gave me, and it had a lot of symbolism and a lot of significance. And so I read it, and it really ministered to me, and I wanted to share it today, but I very distinctly heard the Spirit tell me to read it out loud, and I've never done that before, but so that this is different. But usually when the Spirit nudges me in that in a very specific way like that, it is because there's someone that needs it. And so whoever you are, whoever it is that needs this, you should just know that the Lord is, he sees you and he hears you and he wants you to be comforted. So, all right, I'm gonna start. Picture a grassy field, a wide open space with one sturdy, strong, expansive oak tree. In the middle of this field, near the tree, but not in its shade, was a heap of ashes. I was sitting on this pile of ashes, holding a large, broken piece of turquoise blue glass. Around me in the ashes and in the grass were hundreds, maybe thousands of broken pieces of that same beautiful glass. It was as though I had been holding an expensive crystal vase, and without warning, it had shattered in my hands. It didn't just crack or break, it was completely blown apart, and the tiny pieces were scattered everywhere. I held this one piece in my hands. It was larger than all the other pieces around me. I wasn't crying or sad. I was just frozen, lifeless, empty, like I had been sitting there for a very long time. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a man near me. He wasn't old or young. He was neither handsome nor unattractive. There was nothing remarkable at all about his features except for one thing. He had the most beautiful crystal blue eyes. His skin was tan, the kind of tan that comes from a lifetime of working outside, and his arms and his shoulders looked strong. He wore jeans and a tucked-in white cotton shirt. He had salt and pepper gray hair, and in his hands he held a silk cloth bag. As I sat atop the heap of ashes, he was walking around me, bending down and picking up every single piece of glass. He was careful not to miss any, sifting them out of the ashes, brushing aside blades of grass to make sure every single one was accounted for. He had big hands, equipped for hard work. Maybe a farmer or a rancher. I wasn't sure. He was strong, but he wasn't rough. He was gentle and careful as he touched the earth around him and he gathered up the glass. As he collected the pieces, he placed them inside the silk bag. He wasn't looking at me. His attention was on the broken glass. And as he walked, bent over, constantly scanning the ground in front of him, I noticed something. Beneath his ocean blue eyes, his tanned, slightly wrinkled skin was wet. He had been crying. I watched him carefully, still feeling nothing, as though I was detached from my body. Occasionally, as he bent down, I would see another tear fall. I watched him for hours. He was so thorough, so slow and methodical about this task. I grew tired, but he did not stop. After all the pieces were gathered, he turned and looked directly at me for the first time. The bag he held now contained every single tiny piece of shattered glass. Every piece, except for one. The one in my hand. He held his hand out and looked at me. With both hands, I drew that piece toward my chest and clasped my grip even tighter. Tears welled up in my eyes. I bit my lips together and ever so slightly shook my head no. He just stood there. He lowered his head slightly and looked directly in my eyes and nodded. His face was so kind and his eyes were so blue, almost mesmerizing. He didn't speak, but I heard the words. I know. I know. Hot tears began to stream down my cheeks as I held on tighter still and squinted my eyes shut. I couldn't see him, but I could still feel his presence. He had not left. He was patiently waiting for me. I stood there with my eyes shut, my chest tense, shoulders hunched forward and gripping my hands so tightly that I could not even feel the jagged edges of the glass cutting into my palms. I cried until there were literally no tears left, and then I opened my eyes. He was still standing there, tears dripping off his sun-worn cheeks. He looked at me again and then cast his gaze down to my hands. Suddenly, I felt the sting. My hands were in pain. I looked down and noticed a drop of blood dripping down the side of my arm. I quickly opened my hands and held them out in front of me, staring at them in disbelief. The jagged piece of glass was still there, but now slightly stained with my blood. With my hands open, I looked into his eyes. I didn't speak, but my intention was clear. Okay, take it. The corners of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. It wasn't a smile per se, just a soft and thoughtful shift in his features. He put the silk bag down by his feet and placed his left hand under both of my open hands. His one hand was larger than my two together. I noticed that even though he had dirt under his fingernails and scratches across the top of his hands, his palms were soft and smooth. As he held my hands with his left hand, he reached out with his right and ever so carefully touched the piece of broken glass. Before he lifted it from my hands, he looked in my eyes again. He would not take it without my permission. I nodded. In one moment, it shifted from my grip to his. I instantly felt lighter. I had been completely unaware of how heavy this tiny piece of glass was, how much energy it had taken to hold on to it. Now he carried it. He closed his eyes, sighed heavily, clutching the piece to his chest like it was a cherished treasure, just like I had before. Then he picked up the silk bag from the ground and placed it inside. He turned and began to walk away. Wait, what? The heaviness returned, but now I was holding nothing. Where was he going? Where was he taking it? I stood still and watched him, my heart beginning to race and anxiety returning to my body. And then came the first words either of us had spoken out loud. I tentatively shouted, "Wait!" He stopped, turned, and looked over his left shoulder and said, "Trust me." He walked toward the tree, the one sturdy, expansive oak tree. When he got there, he knelt down. I couldn't see what he was doing. My vision was blurry, and his back was toward me. Suddenly, with no regard for the open cuts on my hand, I could think of only one thing, getting my little piece of glass back. Why did I let him take it? I took several deep breaths and tried to convince myself I would be okay, but I doubted that I would. My brow furrowed, my stomach churned. What if it's gone for good? What if I never get it back? After some time, he stood up and began to walk toward me. The silk bag in his hand looked different. It wasn't heavy and bulging with jagged pieces anymore. In fact, it looked empty. Oh no, what had he done? He walked straight toward me, not looking to one side or the other, but with all of his attention focused on me. He had the most unusual look on his face. His eyes were so serious but kind at the same time, and his mouth was like he was holding back a smile. When he was right in front of me, I held out my hands again. I was suddenly aware of how dirty they were, covered in this mix of ashes, blood, and tears. He took a bottle of water out of his back pocket, poured it over my palms, rinsing off the blood and soothing the open cuts. Then he took the corner of his white shirt and began to wipe them off. He had no regard of how this would sully his clean shirt. He just carefully wiped away the dirt. He was so gentle and compassionate. He clearly had some experience bandaging wounds. I watched his face and noticed how his eyes were focused precisely on my hands. He was so intent, not distracted by anything else. My gaze shifted to his shirt, and I noticed that as he wiped the soot and muck from my hands, his shirt remained unstained. There was literally zero evidence of the filth he was washing away. And when he was done, his shirt was just as white as when he had started. After my hands were clean, he reached into the silk bag and took something out. It was small and hidden in his burly hands. He cocked his head to the side and smiled. It was an actual full ear-to-ear smile. He couldn't hide it. I could see every one of his stunning white teeth. And even though I still had no idea what was going on, I couldn't help but smile too. He took my left hand in his and began to place the most exquisite, perfect, sparkly diamond ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, and it was the most beautiful design, like nothing I had ever seen or imagined. At the same time, it was everything I had ever wanted. After it was placed securely on my hand and he stood before me, he stepped back, arm's length, still holding onto my left hand with his right. I realized he was inviting me to step down off the pile of ashes. Again he smiled, this time more cheerful grin, the face of laughter and pure joy. I was unsure. It was the first time I had moved in ages. I'm not even sure how long I was on that pile of ashes. A year? 2? I wasn't sure if my legs would still work. But I held his hand and he looked so confident and reassuring. I lifted my foot and took one step, then another, and another, until I felt the grass beneath my feet. The grass felt different, cold and refreshing, somewhat familiar, but at the same time, it made me sad to leave my heap of ashes. The ashes had become comfortable and even felt safe. The grassy field was extensive and intriguing, but so much remained unknown. With my thoughts fixed on these conflicting emotions, I had almost forgotten the radiant, dazzling gem on my left hand. What a lavish gift. Why me? I didn't speak those words, but I didn't have to. He turned to me, grabbed both of my hands, and said, "Because I love you. I love you, and it all matters. Every tear matters. Every shattered dream matters. You had so many priceless gifts in that vase. That exquisite piece of glass was holding all of your security, your love, your self-worth, your hopes, and your dreams. It was magnificent, and it was so beautiful, but it was fragile. It was priceless, but it could be shattered. Instead of fixing it, I made it into something new, something that could never be broken. Instead of a delicate, fracturable vessel that you must carry, I gave you a solid, durable, and stunning treasure that you can wear. It will go with you everywhere. You never have to put it down or worry about losing it. The security, the love, the self-worth, the hopes, and the dreams, they're not gone. They just look different now." I smiled and laughed and cried all at the same time. The sun was setting and the sky was a fiery rainbow of colors. We walked to the oak tree and sat down together, soaking in every moment. Soon the last of the colors faded as the night sky sparkled with 1 billion diamond stars. As I cast my gaze in the distance, I could see a firefly dancing across the field, and hope danced in my heart.